priority to rescue Jewish hostages versus
guard at a packing factory in kibbutz Negev.
yeah. So that's your answer right there. Yeah, he was an Arab citizen. I don't know if I'm assuming he was a citizen, Israeli citizen. There's workers that work there too, but I'm assuming he was an Israeli citizen. He's an Arab. Exactly. But I think people forget that not all the hostages are, not all the people that were killed and captured that day on October 7th were Jewish. So there were Arabs that were murdered that day, and there were Arabs that were taken hostage. So must have been an ordeal for him. I can imagine, his captors. I don't know if it was harder or easier for him. I don't know whether the torture he endured was better or worse because he was another Arab. I don't know. I just know I can't imagine what it was like for anybody to be held for the last year, not knowing where they're going to live or die every day. And again, these aren't soldiers. These are men and women and babies in some cases. So that's a good news. Yeah, I saw that last night. Yeah. Which means they need money again. So yeah, we're up on Facebook, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. I know we're starting in Psalm 72 today, and last week we read from about 64 through 71. Most of the Psalms were kind of roughly around the same length. And they had some similar messages, that kind of group that we read. Today we're going to read a couple of different styles, a couple of different ascriptions or superscriptions. This one's an unusual one. There's only 2 Psalms. So there's 116 Psalms that have superscriptions, that say to David or of David. Psalms of Asaph, Psalms of Korach that we already read. This one, there's only 2 Psalms that have this at the beginning, which is Le Shlomo. We have Psalms of Moses too, but this one, Psalms of Ascent. So 160. Now, almost every Psalm we've read so far, in the first section, almost every one of the Psalms has a title before it. We're going to get to some that don't, but this one, we're going to get to sections where there aren't. But this one says Li Shlomo, which they translated as of Solomon. Because when we say Le David, we usually translate it as of David. But Li Shlomo, because the lamed before a word can mean of, but it also could be for. So some people have translated this as for Solomon rather than of Solomon. And the reason is the first line. So we really don't know whether this was written for Solomon, to Solomon, if you will, or by Solomon. But you can see that the idea of this being connected to Solomon, there's a couple of reasons for that. So let's take a look at this Psalm, Psalm 72, which almost is midway through the Psalms. I mean, today we're going to get to literally halfway through the Psalms, 150. But again, they're not grouped so that like midway that there's any indicator that, hey, you're halfway through the Psalms. Though there are some Psalms I think that we're going to read today that are almost central to like if you were going to say, what are the Psalms? What's the message of the Psalms? Some of the ones we're reading today are actually going to give us that kind of feeling. But let's take a look. So Rosemary, if you take Psalm 72 for us.
O God, endow the king with your judgments, the king's son with your righteousness, that he may judge your people rightly, your lowly ones justly. Let the mountains produce well-being for the people, the hills the reward of justice. Let him champion the lowly among the people, deliver the needy folk, and crush those who wrong them. Let them fear you as long as the sun shines, while the moon lasts generations on end. Let him be like rain that falls on a mown field, like a downpour of rain on the ground, that the righteous may flourish in his time, and well-being abound till the moon is no more. Let him rule from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. Let desert dwellers kneel before him, and his enemies lick the dust. Let kings of Tarshish and the islands pay tribute. Kings of Sheba and Seba offer gifts. Let all kings bow to him, and all nations serve him. For he saves the needy who cry out, the lowly who have no helper. He cares about the poor and the needy. He brings the needy deliverance. He redeems them from fraud and lawlessness. The shedding of their blood weighs heavily upon him. So let him live and receive gold of Sheba. Let prayers for him be said always, blessings on him invoked at all times. Let abundant grain be in the land to the tops of the mountains. Let his crops thrive like the forest of Lebanon, and let the people sprout up in towns like country grass. May his name be eternal while the sun lasts. May his name endure. Let peoples invoke his blessedness upon themselves. Let all nations count him happy. Blessed is the eternal God, God of Israel, who alone does wondrous things. Blessed is God's glorious name forever. Such glory fills the whole world. Amen and amen. End of the prayers of David, son of Jesse.
Now, that's a weird line to have at the end because it's like, well, that's the end of the Psalms. Is that it? So it's a weird line because, first of all, it says at the beginning of Solomon, which is one of the reasons why maybe we would say dedicated to Solomon. Is this a prayer? Is this a psalm that he directed and said in honor of his son? Now, of course, the problem is, how would David know that those other things would happen, right? Nor, again, mostly when we look at this psalm and we look at the kinds of things that are discussed here, getting the gold of Sheba, that's the story of the Queen of Sheba coming to King Solomon and giving him money because she's impressed with his knowledge, right? With his wisdom. She hears about how famous he is. And so she comes there. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that this doesn't say the Queen of Sheba. This says the kings of Sheba and Seba, which are two different places, right? There's a lot here besides that too. Solomon's known for his judgment, for his wisdom, for rendering decisions. What? Yeah, so David is dead and then Solomon takes over. And Solomon is considerably younger than his brothers and is kind of like a child of David's when David's probably in his late 40s, early 50s. So, David dies, in his 70s. He turns it over to his son Solomon, who's probably 20 or so at the time. And the events that come out over Solomon's reign, are they predicted here? Or did Solomon write this, or did someone write this in honor of Solomon because of these things that we know about? But again, it says, let the kings of Tarshish and the islands pay tribute, kings of Sheba and Seba. So the word malche, now, in all fairness, it could also be translated as made the royalty of those places. So by that, I mean, so by that, what's your translation say, Reverend Lynn, for kings in verse 10? Let the kings of Tarshish. What? It says kings. Anybody else have a different translation? So the issue is it says kings. It's used for plural, right? The Malche are the Malachim, the kings of these places. So look, the normal translation would be kings, but if one of them was a queen and the rest of them were kings, the term Malche would still be the term, right? It would still be the rulers or the kings. If one of them's a man and three of them are women, the term would still be Malche. So it wouldn't say the queens and a guy. It would be the kings. But so that's why it's really rulers. It's really the rulers. So is it possible that, she's included in that just as a ruler? Yes. But like I said, any amount of those rulers. And by the way, one can make the argument because the rulers would normally be a man, even if you're talking about a group of people, and at the time they were all ruled by women, you could say still the rulers, if you're using the rulers, it would be Malche. Unless like those rulers were always women, you would still use the term Malachim. You'd still use the term kings for rulers. So that's exactly what happens in it. Again, she wasn't the only king, according to or ruler. She wasn't the only ruler that came and presented a tribute to him. And again, even though this psalm doesn't really talk about the temple, there's this kind of understanding that, the Lebanon is mentioned here too, which is the trees that were used to make the temple. And actually it was called, the temple was called because of all the wood from Lebanon. It was the temple of the Lebanon. I mean, it was the cedars of Lebanon that were used for that were the distinguishing feature of the temple. But again, this is kind of the showing that the king is ruling. He's definitely a king who rules more on a throne of stability and not a throne that is constantly being challenged, constantly putting down revolts and subduing vassals, which is what King David does. Solomon seems to, at least during his reign, doesn't really go to war against anybody. He just has to keep everything calm. He has to keep everything stable, and he does that with alliances, with marriages, with a really big army. It says he has a really big army. He's got stations all around the country. And really the only revolt that Solomon really deals with is in his old age, when the northern kingdom splits off, starts to make noise and starts to split off with Jeroboam. His only real problem is keeping the people who are Jewish. And Rehoboam isn't able to keep them at all because he doesn't seem to have any of the skills that his father did. And to some extent, one can make the argument, Solomon's David's son. Solomon still has all of the, he's got David's. Who? Solomon? Because it seems as though he had that other name when he was born, which isn't unusual in that Moses had another name. We don't know what it is, though the rabbis speculate in the Midrash what Moses's birth name was, but it wasn't his. So having another name in the Bible isn't necessarily.
I think we talked about it.
It's not really unusual in that people will have more than one name. Look, God changes people's names. He gives Jacob a totally different name, Israel. I do, but I didn't change my name. people, he can give you one.
I'll give you a good one. I bet you know it.
Danger is his middle name. Yeah, sure. Let's take a look at verse 12. Yeah. Yeah.
Where it says the oppressed, several times where
The lowly.
it's not
Oh, well, the word helper, who have no helper, that's a good translation. The word ozer is literally a helper, is the person who helps you. So So an ezer is a helper. And verse 4 translates it as, oh no, that's the word needy. So the word needy that they translate is the word oni, right? There,
This says, "He shall defend the needy among the people. He shall rescue the poor and crush the oppressor."
yeah. So those who wrong them, so the word that they use there, that word is not used. The word for needy or lowly is no. There. So here technically, the word oni is used for lowly, and the needy is the evion. So evion and oni are here. They're translated as needy and lowly. Oni is really poor, somebody who's poor. Oni is really a sense of more economic. Here it is, oni is translated as lowly, and evion is translated as needy. So the word evion, I think usually would be somewhat economic, but it could also be the oppressed. So I would never translate as oni as oppressed. It really means those who are needy, those who are, I mean, technically, I think oni is better translated as needy rather than lowly. And here, so I'm not sure why. Let me just, I know, but they clearly want to translate evion as needy, and they're using that. No, yeah, they do. Evion is needy in both times. It's just, it used it first here, and here it used second. Do we have any Canadians that are with us right now? No? Anybody online that's Canadian? No? No Canadians. Are we completely Canadianless? Okay, well, I'm only saying, stop. My family lived in Canada. They were there earlier. Yes. They lived in Winnipeg. Yeah, that they snuck over the border into Minnesota. Seriously. So so just so you know, the reason I said that is because the line, those who are there with us can see the motto of Canada is "He shall have dominion from sea to sea and from river until the ends of the earth." Psalm 72:8. That is their motto. That's the motto of the Canadian people. Psalm 72, verse 8. Yay, Canada. So that is that's the Canadians' motto. Seems kind of aggressive for Canadians, actually, if you want to know the truth. Seems kind of, but you know, it's God's dominion. It's not necessarily their dominion. But yeah, they're well, because it kind of seems like they're talking about right here, they're talking about it seems like they're talking about the king. Because when it says, "Let him champion the lowly among the people, let them fear you as long as the sun." Well, there it's God. Yeah, yeah. Well, here it seems like it's God. It seems like it's going back and forth between, I don't know. I'm not even sure that the you here should be God. When it says, "Let the mountains produce," that's not that. Like right here, it says that he may judge your people rightly, right? Let the mountains, let him champion the lowly. That's still the king. It's not God. I mean, we want God to do that too. Let them fear you. Well, then maybe that is where it turns back to God, because correct. Well, they didn't. No, they wouldn't. They would only do it for God.
You can't fear a king for that long because king doesn't live that long.
Yes. Wait.
But I think
Where? Here it's God. Here, these two are God. Wherever you see the capital Y, it's God. But where it says, let him champion the lowly among the people, that's not a capital H. That's the king, right? Let them fear you. The question is let them fear you as long as the sun shines while the moon lasts generations on end. Let him be like rain that fall. The him there is the king.
But I think that's the importance of this psalm, right? That the importance of this psalm is the God language and the king language are so similar.
That you don't know which they're talking about.
That qualities, right? At least that's the comments in.
Aren't they sort of interchangeable?
Well, here they clearly are. Yeah, they clearly are because, yep. But in verse 8, it's not a capital H. When it says, let him rule from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth, that's the king. It's not capitalized. So just so you know, they're definitely using them interchangeably so that it's difficult to know who they're talking about. But no, you don't know because the pronoun. No, they're the only place where it says is God right here. Elohim, oh God, endow the king with your judgments. So
Is he, so it's capitalized.
oh yeah. Oh, they didn't use God? Wait, in verse 1 it never uses the word God?
God is never mentioned.
Huh.
Well, the first verse.
Yeah. No, that's the only place it is. The only place it is verse.
He is capitalized because it's the first word in the sentence.
Oh.
So it's
So they said he will rule, he shall let him rule, he will rule, he shall rule. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. So by making it a capital H at the beginning, Reverend Lynn said her translation obscures whether it doesn't have let. So it says he shall rule from sea to sea. That way the he could be either one. Clearly there's ambiguity here of who they're talking about, which is probably within when the motto of Canada was let him rule from, or he shall rule from sea to sea. Maybe it was King Edward or King George. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Of course it was the king.
You think it's the king. Judith is ruling in favor of the king, of a male, of a person.
Male king, because when
Okay.
did Canada become part of the empire?
Well, 1700 when it was, I mean, once they stole
When
it
did
from
they
the
adopt that motto?
when they stole
No,
it from the French. I
okay.
don't know. I
Right,
mean,
when did they adopt the motto is the better question,
when did
correct?
they adopt the motto? Well, you can ask Wikipedia for it, but I just want to tell you, the Canadians definitely picked up on a they picked up on a smart twist, which is that you don't know whether they're talking about God or a king when they're doing that. I don't know if they're talking about. I don't know if they're
please speak both ways.
exactly. I don't know if they're talking about their hot Prime Minister Trudeau. I don't. I don't think so. I don't think they're talking about Justin Trudeau. I yeah. Well, so yeah. If you look at their yeah, here's the motto
It became from sea to sea and only from sea to sea in the 1900s.
well, there you go.
1900.
So it wasn't even part of their their motto originally. So
Yeah, that's the
as part of the
song.
Canadian, yeah, it's on all Canadian banknotes. So now you know something that probably a lot of Canadians don't know, which is that it comes from Psalm 72. So wait a second. Huh.
Is it intentionally from Psalm 7?
Oh yeah. It's from the Latin I mean, There's not a question that they took it from.
But
It's not a
now they
question.
just use the from C to C. They don't use the whole line.
Yeah, Omari. Yeah, Omari Uske Omari. Yeah. So yeah, then they argued whether it should still be used. So it wasn't until 1921 that originally that it said that. So
He was king.
yeah. All right. Well, there you go. So now Canadians, like so I said, if you're Canadian, you know a little bit more about your history, and if you're not Canadian, you just learned something that most Canadians don't know. I mean, having a Latin motto. I mean, like we have a Latin motto. I mean, everyone wants a Latin motto. If you don't have a Latin motto, you don't really count. But ours isn't based on the Bible, though. No. But this one is. So the Canadians took the Vulgate translation, the Latin translation for that. Yeah. So Psalm 72 is, as we're saying, seems a little unusual in that it has that kind of ambiguity, whether they're talking about a human king or the king, but it ends with a blessing over God, right? And the blessings are interesting in that they really sound like a blessing that we'd have, like this is a blessing that should be like in a prayer book or something like that. It's not. It's not. It's not a prayer. It's not a prayer that we. It's not a prayer that we invoke. It's not like a normal prayer that we go. This is a prayer that we're gonna throw out as a formula, but it really is a formula. It really is, Baruch Adonai. I mean, it's not Baruch Atah Adonai, blessed are you, but Baruch Adonai Elohim, So it is interesting that it kind of ends with those. It doesn't necessarily feel like maybe it did end with those originally. It seems like maybe it ended with verse 17. Yeah. What was that?
Prayer book has a space between 17 and 18.
Oh, it does? Yeah, it
I'm not quite sure what it
probably because there definitely seems to be a feeling that maybe that's where it ended. And the last parts were kind of added later on by editors. Definitely the last line really seems to be and put by an editor. But if that was the case, that this is the end of the prayers of David, son of Jesse, which it's not. I mean, the next couple of Psalms say a Psalm of Asaph. Was the Psalm 72 originally the end of the prayers of the Psalms of David? I mean, we don't know. It doesn't make sense where it is now. And it seems as though that's, if the editor, whoever put this line down, then this doesn't really seem like a psalm that Solomon wrote. It'd be, I think you kind of would say, implied by this last line that this is something that David said for his son, rather than that Solomon did it. Because why would it say the end of the prayers of David, son of Jesse, then? And that's David. That's clearly David, King David. David ben Yishai is his name. That's his last name. David ben Yishai is David, the son of Jesse. That's not a question. So if anyone said, well, maybe the Psalms of David are not King David, I don't know who would say that, but here it gives us his last name, which it doesn't in the Psalms. It doesn't say Mizmor David ben Yishai. This one does. So it's interesting that the last lines really do feel like they were added by an editor, because the last line in 17 seems to be kind of a line that it could end with. It technically could end with line 16. All of those are kind of prayers. And at least this translator feels that, again, it's referring to Solomon or to the king. May his name be eternal. While the sun lasts, may his name endure. Let peoples invoke his blessedness upon themselves, and let all nations count him happy. Well, if we're counting him happy, it's probably not God. Not that we don't think God can be happy, but it's not the kind of way we would normally talk about making God happy. Let's hope that God is happy. We don't, instead of happy. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I don't think that, I would not say the King James is right on that one, because the word osher, Ya'ashrehu, which is what it says here. The word osher means more happy. I mean, I don't know. Baruch is the root for blessed, right? Which is in the next line, blessed. We sometimes use the word blessed for someone who's asher, who's osher, but I'm just going to tell you, if you're going to keep it consistent, and just pop back to the very first word of the very first psalm. Right? Ashrei ha'ish. Right? Ashrei ha'ish. Happy is the one. Now, does the King James say blessed is the one for Ashrei ha'ish for Psalm 1? Blessed is the man, yeah. So they're at least consistent with that. But yeah, so we normally use the word osher as happy rather than blessed. What does yours say, Reverend Lynn?
May his name remain forever and be established as long as the sun endures. May all the nations bless themselves in him and call him blessed.
Oh, so they use the King James, blessed, rather than osher, which is usually we translate as happy nowadays. And Psalm 1 is happy. So her translation is not consistent in happy or blessed for osher. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could make the argument it doesn't have to be translated the same every time, but I don't know how you separate. I don't know how you distinguish the word asher from then blessed, which was barech. I don't know how you distinguish that. I don't know. There's definitely a difference between happy and blessed. I mean, you don't have to be blessed to be happy, and I guess you don't have to be happy to be blessed. I'm not sure, but they're not the same. I mean, I don't think of them as the same. You could be blessed and not be happy, right? There's a lot of people are blessed and they don't seem happy. Go, man, that guy's blessed. Doesn't seem happy. I guess, but
Maybe you don't know you've been blessed.
well, that's true. But happy definitely seems to be your reaction to it or reaction to something. I would say it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily show thought. On the other hand, would you rather be happy or would you rather, like, how do you know whether you're blessed? I mean, I guess, I don't know. I'm not sure whether
On your level of faith.
Well, it also depends on your state of mind.
Yes.
look, normally we say if we're blessed, normally we would say, especially in Judaism, we'd say, in order to be blessed, God had to have done the blessing. Normally, I mean, we don't believe that a person has the power to bless somebody. I mean, we're blessing in the name of God. When I give someone a blessing, we're saying, may God bless you and keep you, right? It's like, I'm blessing you. When someone sneezes, we say, bless you, but we say, God bless you, really. We're saying the short form of it. So I'm not sure that we ever say blessing, or we're supposed to say blessing where it's not God that's doing the blessing. But does one have to be, if you're not a religious person, a person of faith, can you be blessed and not feel that you're blessed?
Absolutely. I've had people say to me, God is watching you because they believe God is watching them. But I don't necessarily have to believe that God is watching me.
So they're different. And that's the thing that I would say is a little, it's look, I don't know. I guess people translate based on what they feel, right? Based on what they feel is the proper intent. Yeah. Like, what is that person really trying to say? I mean, definitely in this one, and they're talking about, they're here talking about, they use the word blessing here. I guess that's one of the other things. It's like, why would you use the word blessing here and use the same word there? I mean, the word barech is here, right? Let the nations invoke his blessedness upon themselves, and let all nations count him happy. I mean, I guess they're saying it's got to be synonymous because it's used in the same line.
Not the nations bless themselves.
No, they're invoking him. He's making them blessed by invoking his name. They're blessing themselves, so they're being blessed through him by invoking his name. We're allies with Solomon, and we're blessed because of him. I don't know. I mean, I agree with Reverend Lynn that happy sounds kind of shallow. It doesn't sound like it's that meaningful. It sounds also kind of fleeting, you know. I'll be happy today, but I'm not going to be happy. Well, maybe I won't be happy today. I'll change my mind and not be happy by the end of the day. So it seems fleeting, but it's definitely, maybe we just don't have a good word for it in English, you know? Maybe the word osher, I think that's possible, that we just don't really have a good word for it. To some extent, the word osher is the happiness that one feels by being blessed. It's not even happiness. It's being blessed. It's if it's the position of being blessed and being in that blessing, you know, being blessed, blessedness. That's really what it is, because they're invoking blessing, right? And I mean, that's what they said, blessed, and they already used that word. They use blessedness there for that one. I don't know. I mean, it's really that it's inhabiting that emotion of maybe feeling blessed, because that's why it says at the beginning, Ashrei Ha'ish, happy is the man, right? Happy, but it's like, you know, blessed is, and that's either one's good, because the idea is it's positive because the person's been blessed. So just think about that. I mean, you know, when we see that name, the word Osher, and the name Asher in Hebrew is the name Asher means blessed. That's what it means, or happy. But it definitely is, you know, kind of different meaning if you told someone that their name meant happiness rather than blessed. But we say Osher. We say, you know, when a couple gets married, we use the word Osher, where they should be filled with blessing. I guess we probably use the word happiness too. So again, this is not the ends of the prayers of David, son of Jesse. Maybe it was at one point. We don't know how these were, again, organized and then reorganized. As we mentioned, some of the times we thought over the last several thousand years, we thought there was organization to this that was set a long time ago. At least by the time of the Septuagint, which is 2,000 years ago, it turned out we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh, it turned out, whoa, they had close to the same Psalms, but they were different enough that we started thinking maybe they weren't quite set that early, because like for example, there's a Psalm, we call it Psalm 151. It's in the Septuagint. It's not in the Hebrew Bible. And we thought it was like an addition later on. We thought like the Christian or a Greek writer, you know, included it. Maybe they were Jewish. They didn't have to be Christian, but that it was written in Greek. It turned out we found a copy of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that meant there was a Hebrew version of it. And yeah, it flipped our knowledge of Psalm and all books of the Bible on its head, because we started to realize that maybe this really wasn't finished until pretty close to around the time of Jesus, right? 2,000 years ago, but it was really done during that period and maybe not fully done yet. From the standpoint, again, Septuagint gives us like a cutoff of saying, well, if it's in the Septuagint, then the Jewish people had it and they had organized it, and Septuagint was created by Jews. There's no question. But turns out maybe it wasn't done that long before that. And maybe, again, not all Jews were on the same page of what page they were supposed to be. So the Dead Sea Scrolls kind of prove that. Not by not having books, but by having books. That's the weird thing, is that the stuff that we found proved that the organization and the canonization wasn't finished as early as we thought it was by us.
Interesting that 51 is there and Esther isn't, right?
Esther is not in there at all. Yes.
Yeah.
Is not in the Dead Sea Scrolls at all. Yeah.
Right.
Reverend Linders.
It's closed.
Yeah.
The books that don't make it into the canon. I think that's fascinating.
Very, very interesting. So Reverend Lynn saying again, the books that didn't make it in, that's a fascinating thing to think about. And again, to think about the books that just were not saved by anybody, didn't make it. And again, as we mentioned, some of these things didn't make it, not because they weren't important or they weren't beautiful or they weren't holy to somebody, but that there just was no space for it. Some of the editorial decisions were literally the ones that editors still make today, which is it won't fit. It doesn't fit on the page. So we have to cut off that paragraph because it's not as necessary. And so we took it out. And that's what some of these decisions were made on. We're going to read, and actually it says in the rabbi said, David wrote thousands of Psalms. It says he wrote thousands, 4,000 Psalms. We have 150, and they're not all ascribed to him. So how many Psalms were there? So it says so. I mean, the rabbi said that there were. By the way, the rabbis also say that they are still debating and arguing over books of the Bible during the time of Rabbi Akiva, who lived around 135, lived during the Bar Kokhba revolt. So that tells you, I mean, the rabbis actually admit it. It's not like they didn't say it. I don't know why people don't take them at their word on that, which is that they hadn't decided fully by that. And that's 130 years, that's 100 years after Jesus was crucified. So we know that. I don't understand why people take them at their word. If they tell you that they hadn't done it until then, they didn't. Anyway. Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting that they take it literally, but they don't take that comment that they said that they were arguing over which books of the Bible are going to be canonized. Why would you not believe that? About around that time of around 200, which means that the Bible was canonized. This is important, and people again don't want to admit this, that the Hebrew Bible wasn't canonized until around the time the Mishnah was finished. And the fact that they were done around the same time is not a coincidence, which was Roman persecutions, and they wanted to make sure they had the books that they were going to keep and they could take on the run with them when they were going to be exiled. And the temple had already been destroyed. It's just not all the Jews all the Jews were never completely exiled, but they were still living there, obviously, during the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, because they had a revolt. And that was not their first revolt after the 70 revolt. They had been revolting. They were constantly revolting. They were revolting people. They were always revolting against the Romans. They didn't really stop. But in 135, that was the end. That was the last revolt. So, yeah, I mean, that's when Israel got renamed Palestine. That was when the Romans said, enough. You're never going to do it. Yeah. So that's how they did it. Anyways, so that's fairly late. So let's look at Psalm 73. This one's called a Psalm of Asaph, and we're going to see that title a lot. Is Asaph a person? Maybe. It's a name that exists, but it also could be, the word asaf also means addition, to add, uh, to assemble to some extent, to put together. But yeah, it's usually not translated as anything other than a Psalm of Asaph. So here's Psalm 73. And a lot of people, this Psalm, the previous Psalm, a lot of people say, well, that seems like a lot about a king, and even though, as we said, the Canadians loved it enough to put it in there, a line in there on their money, and everywhere else, this Psalm really is a much more of a personal Psalm. The last Psalm is definitely a kingly Psalm. I mean, it's clearly a kingly Psalm. Doesn't mean it doesn't have like I said, it has a purpose, and people have repurposed it. This Psalm, though, is a really interesting Psalm, and I actually have a musical version of this that I'll play. Not a Gentile, a Christian version of the Psalm, but Psalm 73 is a very personal Psalm. And Martin Buber, who was one of the great Jewish philosophers, he said that this was his favorite Psalm in the Psalms, which is quite amazing because he was very knowledgeable. He was raised by Orthodox grandparents, and he moved to Israel to become one of their first kind of great philosophers, definitely modern philosophers. And he was not Orthodox himself, but he was steeped in Orthodox Judaism. And he loved this Psalm. So let's see maybe why this is such a powerful Psalm.
God is truly good to Israel, to those whose heart is pure. As for me, my feet had almost strayed. My steps were nearly let off course, for I envied the wanton. I saw the wicked at ease. Death has no pangs for them. Their body is healthy. They have no part in human travail. They are not afflicted like the rest of humankind. So pride adorns their necks, lawlessness enwraps them as a mantle. Fat shuts out their eyes. Their fancies are extravagant. They scoff and plan evil. From their eminence, they plan wrongdoing. They set their mouths against heaven, and their tongues range over the earth. So they pound this people again and again until they are drained of their very last tear. Then they say, how could God know? Is there knowledge with the Most High? Such are the wicked, ever tranquil. They amass wealth. It was for nothing that I kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence, seeing that I have been constantly afflicted, that each morning brings new punishments. Had I decided to say these things, I should have been false to the circle of your disciples. So I applied myself to understand this, but it seemed a hopeless task till I entered God's sanctuary and reflected on their fate. You surround them with flattery. You make them fall through blandishments. How suddenly are they ruined, wholly swept away by terrors. When you are aroused, you despise their image, as one does a dream after waking, O my sovereign. My mind was stripped of its reason. My feelings were numbed. I was a dolt without knowledge. I was brutish toward you. Yet I was always with you. You held my right hand. You guided me by your counsel and led me toward honor. Whom else have I in heaven? And having you, I want no one on earth. My body and mind fail, but God is the stay of my mind, my portion forever. Those who keep far from you perish. You annihilate all who are untrue to you. As for me, nearness to God is good. I have made the sovereign God my refuge, that I may recount all your works.
So, yeah. Uber, who was raised religious and then was not religious for most of his life, and then maybe kind of felt in his later years a sense of feeling, and he lived the end of it. So he lived in Europe, and he got out of Germany in 1930, and a lot of his friends and family were murdered, but he I think he died in 65 in Israel. He was one of the first professors at major professors at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And Buber, like he's considered, I mean, you've heard of Martin Buber, right? He's considered one of the eminent theologians of the past century. But he loved this. Yeah, yeah. He wrote a famous book called I and Thou, which is his kind of summary of it, he was very inspired and directed by existentialists. It actually kind of made him not less religious, but it informed his theology, but he was steeped in the Bible, and he actually made some very important translations of rabbinic texts, Hasidic texts. I mean, he did a lot to help people understand traditional Judaism, even though, again, he was not Orthodox. But I think why he liked this psalm, and I think one of the things that makes the psalm so powerful is that you see a person's journey on this psalm, right? The person doesn't understand why people who don't act, righteously are getting away with stuff. They're very upset by this. He's upset by the fact that they're getting away with stuff. And he feels like it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't seem to matter. And then he starts to really think about it. And, the change happens when he says, I entered God's sanctuary and reflected on their fate. And that's where, again, and it says, I wanted to know, I wanted to understand this. And that in itself seemed hopeless. That seemed like I couldn't do it. But when he really did it and started thinking about, it's not how they're enjoying life now, it's what they're destined for. And it doesn't say anywhere here, by the way, it doesn't say anywhere here they're going to hell. I just want to make it clear. That's not what it says. So I know, like, that might be the implication that, like, when it talks about where they're, what their fate is, what's in front, what's going to happen to them, that we understand that some people would say that means they're going to hell. Their punishment will be there. But it doesn't actually say that. In all fairness, it doesn't say that. It says that they fall even during this world, even in this lifetime, even in this existence. And their ruin, all right? How suddenly are they ruined? When they go down fast, and they go down hard. And it is a strange thing that, like, when it happens, and people want to believe and say that this is going to happen, and walk around going, well, it doesn't really happen to people. Like, but it does. It does. You saw how quickly, how immediately Bernie Madoff went down. It was unbelievable. Like, you saw it happen. And I remember how highly regarded he was. And I remember how people felt so lucky to be in his presence and to be included in his, in his investments. He turned people away. That was part of the allure that he had. People would come to him and say, I want to invest in your stuff. He's, no, I don't have space. We can't, we're not taking any new investors. People would walk away dejected by it. People were asking him for donations and applying for for grants and for stuff. I mean, I remember it. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. And then it happened overnight. The whole thing crumbled, and people saw it, and I mean, it happened right in front of everybody. I mean, his sons are both dead. One committed suicide and one died of cancer. He's no kid, and his kids changed their names, and his grandkids don't have their name. he had two sets of families that changed their names so that they wouldn't have his last name anymore. I mean, that really happened in our last decade. So I don't know. I think people, like, they see what they want to see, and they don't realize that, you don't have to have, the punishments don't have to be in the world to come. Every day that guy woke up and knew that that could be his last day, is that not a terror? Is that not a terror that the guy had, knowing that at any moment the thing could collapse? I mean, some people said that when he finally got arrested, that he felt relieved. When they came to him and finally took him away, that he was relieved. And I think that's because every day he had to wake up knowing that this could be the day. And when it didn't happen, it's just, I'm going to get picked up tomorrow. So it happens. I don't know. I mean, does it happen every time? I guess not, but happens enough, and it happens to people who you think it will never happen to. Man, I'm just thinking about the people in our community that it happened to, because we know it happens to these people. It's only happened. I mean, it seems like sometimes it seems like it only happens to Jewish people, but it happens to everybody. I mean,
Certainly not.
no, but it happened to Harvey Weinstein too.
Don't think go down this stuff.
No, I know, but it happened to people who people never thought, they never thought these people would get caught, right? And there would never be a comeuppance, right? No, I don't either. But it's interesting that when it happens to our people, like, I don't know. I would say we at least should be paying attention to it.
Well, if it's financial, right, that's a historical bigotry that come down.
I know, but the sexual stuff that happened and was also financial with Weinstein. I mean, look, I just saw a special about Peter Nygard. I mean, you don't have to be Jewish for these horrible stories to happen when you get comeuppance. But when you see people who,
No, I
yeah,
think what you're doing is trying to hold us to a different standard.
no, I'm saying that it's interesting that when it happens, that we tend to understand it, and first of all, I don't think anybody's making excuses for these people either. But it does seem like when it plays out, and it plays out for, politicians, it happens in every sphere, right? Every sphere of life we've seen people. I mean, it just happened with Menendez in New Jersey, and he thought he was untouchable, and he went down. I mean, yeah, it's not all, I mean, obviously it's not all Jewish people, but I think when we see it, I really look at it as saying, you should know better.
Like 22. I was stupid and had no understanding. I was like a brute beast in your presence.
Yeah. And that's why they translate it as brutish, because the word is behemoth, right? Behemoth, right? That's the word behemoth. It's like an animal. It's a brute animal, which is why they translate it as brutish, because there's an animal nature to this. I was brutish towards you. But brutish actually sounds more violent, right? Like more of a, like,
Incredibly stupid.
no, but what?
These aren't stupid people.
No, well, the whole only thing is in the word behemoth, brutish to me sounds like somebody who's a big brute. Like I'm thinking of a guy who's going to terrorize you because they're brute strength.
They're arrogant.
Okay, but a brute here in behemoth could also mean dumb as, like when we say dumb as an ox. A behemoth is a big, dumb animal. And that's really what it is. It's a big, dumb animal. And that's why when he says I was adult, a bear, that is like not understanding, it's like being stupid.
I see how that's defined here, but when we use a brute,
Yeah.
we use a brute as generally, right? Well, it doesn't have to be large, I guess, just an aggressive.
Yeah.
Person.
Shouldn't be that. That shouldn't be that. It's more, I wouldn't use the word oafish, but it's more, he's saying about himself, I was an idiot, but I was like a dumb idiot. That's why brute is not, I don't think is a great translation there. I was not brutish amongst, like, if you're only going to use the word brute as it's a brute animal with like, yes.
You know, it's line 22 that's more appropriate. The first one, my mind was stripped of its reason,
Mhm.
right? So these people, they know better, right? It's the difference between a speculator and an investor, right? Speculator knows what he's doing, he's taking the risk. An investor is doing something and not knowing the risk he's taking. So that's what, in this case, this is obviously much more egregious.
But he's saying about himself, right? He's saying, he's not talking about the people. He's not talking about the people who were doing the bad things. He's talking about himself thinking that they were getting away with it. And more importantly, it says right from the beginning, I was jealous of those people. I was jealous of them. I wanted, to some extent, to be like them. Right? I wanted to be like them. I had envy. I envied them. What? So
Times they haven't changed.
no, but and it's so powerful that somebody said this about themselves. This admission that I had it wrong, and I was looking at people and saying, why can't I be like these people getting away with it?
It's a conversion.
Yeah. So I think when I think about this, I think about, in knowing that someone like Buber looked at this and said, this is my, Martin Buber, was saying the Psalm that let me see if I can actually show you. Well, I'll show you a picture of Martin Buber, but when I think about him connecting with this Psalm, I think about him, kind of, so again, he was kind of like a rabbi who was the rabbi for people who were not who were not Jewish, people who did not have to have a religion at all. But he was had deeply Zionist feelings. He also believed in peace, by the way. I mean, he was also deeply committed to having peace with the Arabs who lived there. Yeah. He lived in Edward Said's family home in Jerusalem. That's interesting. So, the retelling of Hasidic and Chinese tales, biblical commentary, and metaphysical dialogue. He was a staunch supporter of a binational solution, and after the establishment of a regional federation of Israel and Arab states. And he believed in stuff that nobody else believed in, that people could actually live in peace together with their neighbors. But he was a deeply held Zionist, and so here's his he rejected the label of philosopher or theologian, right? He says is an ich du, which is German for I thou or I you. In a relationship that stresses mutual holistic existence of two beings, it is a concrete encounter because these beings meet one another in their authentic existence without any qualification or objectification of one another. Even imagination and ideas do not play a role in this relation. In an I-thou encounter, infinity and universality are made actual rather than being merely concepts. Buber stressed that in this I-thou relationship, lacks any composition, there's no structure, and communicates no content. Despite the fact that the I-thou cannot be proven to happen as an event, cannot be measured, Buber stressed that it is real and perceivable. So he believed that this is our relationship with God, right? It's not something that you can, you can't qualify, you can't measure, you can't say how long it lasted. All of these terms don't really work. The I-thou relationship lasts as long as the individual wills it. And the individual finally returns to the I-it way of relating. This acts as a barrier to deeper relationship and community. So, yeah, if you want to read more about him and reads, look, there's parts of his writing that are difficult to access. I'm not gonna make it seem simple. It's not. I mean, even that wasn't simple to understand. But there are introductions to Buber that are out there, and like I said, he was a rabbi to lots of people who were not Jewish. So, yeah, he married a woman, Paula Winkler, who is a Catholic writer, brilliant Catholic writer from a Bavarian peasant family. I don't know if he said that or who said that, but it's in quotes. But she converted to
Look it up.
Judaism.
It's number 6.
Yeah, she converted to him. So, yeah, you want to see who said that? I don't know. It's not. But again, he also lived right at the nexus of Europe at the end of its time as a place for the Jewish people. So I really love his Hasidic tales. To me, is one of the. But it doesn't really give you a. It really doesn't give you a window into his philosophy. But his Hasidic tales is a very accessible. And the tales of the Hasidim are very readable, and I think it's still one of the best collections of Hasidic tales. And this is, I mean, there's lots of translations and lots of translations and collections of these that you can get. Chaim Potok said that Buber romanticized his subjects. There's no question he did, but he lived at a time when you can kind of Hasidism at the time was almost non-existent when Buber wrote it, or collected it. He didn't, edited these things together, because this was before Chabad and these other groups kind of had a rebirth. When he did it, he was almost looking at it as if it was done. I don't know how he would have approached it if Buber had lived today, whether he would have, but I don't know. I mean, look, he lived at a time when Hasidism was almost extinguished. It was almost gone. So, well, what I said I was going to do is I want to share one musical version of this. This is an interesting one. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but this is a very interesting version, I think, of it, in that it's not Martin Buber at all. It's a Christian rock version of it. But what I like about this version is that it captures in the refrain this feeling of like, I think it's almost I think the way that they compose this, it almost is sad, but it's from a Christian rock group that doesn't exist anymore. There's 3 sisters that were part of this rock group. They kind of disband, or they're still sisters. They just don't perform anymore. And I actually saw some pictures that they posted a few years ago on their trip to Israel. But they actually are interesting because they are very conservative, raised very conservative. But they've had an issue with some of the politics that exist in the conservative Christian community. But they are very religiously conservative. They just politically were not like that. And so they're called Barlow Girl. And so what is interesting is it's kind of like a teen rock song, but it's like what a teenager or how somebody who is young would look at the world and say, hey, this doesn't seem to make sense. Why do people who are doing bad things to other people and to themselves, why are these people getting away with this and we're not, and we're trying to live a righteous life. So I'm going to play this song and you'll hear it. 1 second. you can see for, teen rock people, to have a song that captures, one second.
So human to be jealous.
Yeah. Yeah. And you see that what they're saying is still getting an echo. No, still got the echo. Nobody else is uh, so for a young person to say it is even more powerful, maybe, is what I'm saying. So so Rosemary, if you want to take the next Psalm, Psalm 74, which is a maskil.
Why, O God, do you forever reject us? Do you fume in anger at the flock that you tend? Remember the community you made yours long ago, your very own tribe that you redeemed, Mount Zion, where you dwell. Bestir yourself because of the perpetual tumult, all the outrages of the enemy in the sanctuary. Your foes roar inside your meeting place. They take their signs for true signs. It is like those who wield axes against a gnarled tree. With hatchet and pike, they hacked away at its carved work. They made your sanctuary go up in flames. They brought low in dishonor the dwelling place of your presence. They resolved, let us destroy them altogether. They burned all God's tabernacles in the land. No signs appear for us. There is no longer any prophet. No one among us knows for how long. Till when, O God, will the foe blaspheme? Will the enemy forever revile your name? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Draw it out of your bosom. O God, my sovereign from of old, who brings deliverance throughout the land. It was you who drove back the sea with your might, who smashed the heads of the monsters in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of the Leviathan, who left it as food for the denizens of the desert. It was you who released springs and torrents, who made mighty rivers run dry. The day is yours, the night also. It was you who set in place the orb of the sun. You fixed all the boundaries of the earth. Summer and winter, you made them. Be mindful of how the enemy blasphemes God, how base people revile your name. Do not deliver your dove to the wild beast. Do not ignore forever the band of your lowly ones. Look to the covenant, for the dark places of the land are full of the haunts of lawlessness. Let not the downtrodden turn away disappointed. Let the poor and needy praise your name. Rise, O God, champion your cause. Be mindful that you are blasphemed by scoundrels all day long. Do not ignore the shouts of your foes, the din of your adversaries that ascends all the time.
So this psalm continue. Oh, hold it a second. I'm still getting feedback. This psalm definitely gives us a feeling not of an individual, but on a national level. The people who have destroyed us, who have attacked the temple, the people who've attacked your people are getting away with it. So this isn't like completely different than the previous psalm, which is on a personal level. It's like what we feel on a daily basis. This is on a national level, and then even expands on a metaphysical level to saying, God, you're the ones you're the one who did all this amazing stuff in our world, created our world, created the universe. Can't you step out now and fix this, protect your people? You have the power to do it. And it goes through the litany of things that God did, which of course, some of them sound strange because we haven't read about them before. They don't seem to be in our, they're not in our text. We haven't read them yet. But here, what's interesting about this is that, we have stories about the Leviathan in the Midrash. We have lots of stories about the Leviathan there. And, the more we kind of started understanding about the ancient Near Eastern religions and those other myths, we started seeing similarities to them and got some better context, as kind of religious historians and anthropologists. We started saying, that sounds a lot like the Canaanite myth, or that sounds a lot like the Assyrian myth. But this idea that the Leviathan, which by the way, it says heads of the Leviathan, doesn't say head. It seems that the Leviathan has many heads or multiple heads. Somehow is this is a myth about a monster, a sea monster. I mean, well, it doesn't, we don't, I mean, we don't understand the whole context of this from here, but when we reconstruct it from other places, the story of the Leviathan is a story of a primordial ancient sea beast that gets killed and the food is spread about for people to eat. There's also a story that at the end of days, the other Leviathan, because it's not the only Leviathan, the other Leviathan that will be killed will be the food for us in the world to come in the Messianic age. The Leviathan will be slaughtered again, or the next Leviathan. But there's this idea that the Leviathan was food, or the first Leviathan was food for people. I mean, it's here. I mean, this isn't the only place in the Bible. This is the first place we've seen it, is in Psalms. But we'll see it again in the book of Job, references to the Leviathan. A sea monster. But the issue is that, it's not the only monster. Is that what it says? A giant squid? No, there's people who he wants calamari. He wants calamari. However, we don't know. But the interesting thing is the rabbis say at the end of days, when God slaughters these great beasts, it will be kosher, which seems to imply that there'll be other stuff that we get to eat in the world to come that is not kosher. The rabbis they can dream about eating this treif but yeah, Leviathan wouldn't seem to be a kosher beast. There's three beasts that we get to eat: the great water beast, the Leviathan, the great land beast, Behemoth, and the great bird, the Ziz bird. That we get to have all three in the world to come. One, the ruling beast in each of those spheres gets to be our food in the world to come. But Leviathan, here again, it's very clear from this psalm, there was a Leviathan at one point that was killed by God and given to food. And again, what else did God do? He put the sun up in the sky, right? The sun was put up there by God. The boundaries of the earth, whatever the boundary, however that's supposed to be understood, but that God put, that God, did all these things, that God, makes the summer and winter, right? Assumingly those are connected, right? The boundaries of the earth and summer and winter are somehow, again, located at the ends of the earth, and make their way. It takes them a while to get to us because they're at the extremes of the earth. this is what this psalm is telling us. It's kind of giving us a little view of their mythology, if you will. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it's God who did it all. It's not like, everyone else believed these were all gods on the that onto their in their own in their own there were gods on their own, had their own minds, if you will. Here it's God is doing all of it. But God did kill Leviathan. I mean, in all fairness, it seems like God is doing the kinds of stuff that Zeus would have done. But yeah, these are all things that God did. But they're all there because we want God not to forget to do that now for us, to exercise some of that power, right? Use some of that power now and get it done. And again, the people that we're asking you to get are people who blaspheme you. They're people who don't believe in you. These are your adversaries. And again, to get back to a point Reverend Lynn was talking about, here's the phrase Oniva Evion used together again, the poor and the downtrodden, or the poor and the needy. That's here again, used, both terms used together side by side. And again, God, don't let these people suffer without there being retribution. Remember the covenant, that's probably, again, part of the whole deal. God, if you pay attention to the covenant that you have with us. So this is much different than the previous psalm, which is much more of a personal spiritual journey. This is a God, get off your, and get moving, get this done, get these people off our backs, right? I can't think of it, of how it's used in Jewish stuff either. Maybe because it talks about such mythic things, but I can't, I don't think of it as a psalm that's used in Jewish sources. I will tell you, some traditions say that it's recited on the second day of Passover, and verses 2 and 12 are said before the Shema on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So let me see why line 12 would be. Yeah, bringing deliverance, Elohim, Malchei Mekedem, yeah. But let's see what this line 2. Remember your community you made yours long ago, your very own tribe that you redeemed, Mount Zion, where you dwell. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those lines are taken out of context and are, very simple line. But overall, yeah, the Psalm's not used in its entirety. Those couple lines. Well, I guess I did say on the second day of Passover it's used. I'm not sure why for Passover, but I mean it's a psalm of redemption. But yeah, there's no idea of matzah there. All right, so Psalm 75. This is technically, I guess you could say, the midpoint in the book of Psalms, because there's 150 Psalms. So this is the midway point here. This one says Lamnat Seach. This says for the conductor, for the leader, all tashchet, which they don't translate. But again, the word tashchet doesn't seem to be a word that really connects to psalmistry. Mizmor is a psalm, la asaf, to asaf, and then it says shir. So a mizmor is used here and shir are both used, which we have psalms where it says a psalm and then also a song. But all tashchet, again, not usually translated. What does yours say, Mary? They do all tashchet. All tashchet. Yours? Anybody? John, do you have anything on yours? Glory? We mentioned this before. It's been used. This is not the first psalm we've had it. Al tashchet literally can mean what?
Do not destroy.
Yeah. I don't know. Like you were supposed to destroy any of the psalms, but it doesn't really make sense to say do not destroy. But yeah. Al tashchet literally means don't, and the tashchet means destroy or slaughter. The word shochet, right, means to slaughter, right? Yeah, it doesn't, we don't really know. And so that's why we don't usually translate it. We just leave it as al tashkhet. So let's take a look at Psalm 75.
We praise you, O God. We praise you. Your presence is near. People tell of your wondrous deeds. At the time I choose, I will give judgment equitably. Earth and all its inhabitants dissolve. It is I who keep its pillars firm. Selah. To the wanton I say, do not be wanton. To the wicked, do not lift up your horns. Do not lift up your horns up high in vainglorious bluster. For exaltation comes not from the east, or from the west, or the wilderness. For God it is who gives judgment, bringing down one and lifting up another. There is a cup in God's hand with foaming wine fully mixed. From this God pours. All the wicked of the earth drink, draining it to the very dregs. As for me, I will declare forever, I will sing a hymn to the God of Jacob. All the horns of the wicked I will cut, but the horns of the righteous shall be lifted up.
Yeah, there seems to be a definite fixation on horns in this psalm. Horns.
It's not horns of the altar.
No, these are horns that are more like the horns of animals, and it's horns that we see in another book of the Bible that we're going to get to that's in this section. Daniel. No. No, other than, again, these horns seem to be horns of power, right? They seem to be power. Again, this is not a psalm that we use a lot during,
It's weird.
yeah, it's a psalm that definitely seems to be connected to a time when people talked about this kind of imagery and used it. We don't use that symbol, right? The horn is really a symbol for power, for honor. This psalm is definitely talking about people who have the horns out, that they don't deserve it. They're being arrogant. They're going to be cut off, those horns. There's an understanding that the horns are, we have, if we are doing the right thing, we are the horns. We have the horns ourselves. But if we don't, then our enemies will have those horns, and the wicked will have them. In Daniel, the book of Daniel, it talks about this. There's a very famous imagery in Daniel where it says that there's a fourth beast, and that beast has 10 horns, and the horns sometimes are seen in the commentaries, and what Daniel's talking about here is maybe kings or rulers that are going to come against us. But this psalm talks about horns in similar ways as some symbols of strength, as symbols of power, and that eventually the horns of the wicked will be cut. They'll be cut off, and the horns of the righteous will be lifted up. Some people say it sounds like a shofar, right? Like the horns that are used for a shofar, but it probably is more like horns on an animal that, are going to gore you or hit you, not necessarily horns that are cut off for a shofar, but that didn't stop people from thinking that maybe it's connected to that. The horn that we see when someone blows a shofar is reminiscent of that, or makes us think about those symbols of power. But these are definitely symbols of power. I mean, there's no question. When, God says, don't lift up your horns, you wicked people. Yeah, that's clearly a reference to, people using their power who don't deserve it, or they shouldn't have power. The word for horn in Hebrew is karen. Karen. It is connected to the Karen. kind of, yeah, or Keren, Karen. So Karen, the name Karen is a derivative of that. But when Moses, this is the connection. When Moses comes down from the mountain, when he's at Mount Sinai, he comes down and it says Karen Or, which means horns or rays of light. The translation was he came down with horns. If it's just horns, then you can have a statue of Moses with horns on it, because Moses had horns and Jews have horns. But the word literally, the full word was Karen Or, horns of light, which most would say those are rays of light, that he came down with rays of light coming off of him. It's also possible that they weren't, they were horns or protuberances, which were caused by coming into contact with God's light and power, and that he came down with things that look like horns. That the Karen Or are not horns of light, but horns that were caused by the radiance of God. Whatever it was, the people didn't want to see him anymore, and they made him wear a veil for the rest of his life. So whatever the Karen Or looked like, they didn't want to see it anymore. So it is possible that he had some kind of disfiguration after coming off the mountain. It's possible. It's at least possible that's what happened. It's not what people want to think about. They don't like it. Even the rabbis didn't want to go down that road. But the Torah flat out says he came down. The Torah says that they told him to put on a veil afterwards. So the idea that he came down, the idea that he came down with horns, that's weird, and it's on the Michelangelo statue. But the idea that the horns just were like horns on a cow or whatever, little tiny horns that came out of his head that were cute, it doesn't really seem to be the case either, because it says he had rays of Karen Or. That's what it says. It doesn't say that it was shiny. It says they were horns of light, but it could be horns caused by the light, or horns that were burned onto him from the light. So I'm just telling you, there's a lot of biblical scholars who argue, look, you're reading it the way you want to read it, but the way it could be read, I had a professor who wrote a paper that Moses was disfigured from. That was his paper was on Moses being disfigured by the light. So yes, it is connected to horns, Jewish horns, if you will. But did he have rays of light coming off of him, or, did he have disfiguration? So
The way the people did not comfortably look at it.
for sure. So here's the horns of Moses, whereby Moses was presented as having two horns on his head, later replaced by rays of light. The idea comes from a translation or mistranslation of Hebrew term in the Vulgate, where Moses is said to be horned or radiant or glorified after he sees God. It predates Jerome and can be traced back to Aquila, Greek-Jewish. Yeah, but here's the famous statue, right? So there's the statue.
So isn't
Which-
that where it comes from?
Yes, well, that's where what? Yeah, but it's not that that's where we don't get it from the Psalm, but it is. That's why I said it's connected to that. That's why I did this, John, was so that you can see, yes, there is a connection to it. It doesn't come from the Psalm. It comes from the Moses story, and the fact that, again, there were depictions of Moses with horns. So, was it supposed to be like this, right? Or, was it, and so that's what we're left with. We're left with these images. I don't know. The fact that people didn't want to see him anymore indicates to me that they weren't pleasant. They weren't pleasant. It wasn't pleasant to look at. It was scary. So, none of them show him wearing a veil. None of them. There's yet to be a movie like that. All right. So Psalm 76, The Shining. Very good.
Maybe it
Reverend
wasn't
Elizabeth,
him.
The Shining. The Shining. Yeah, if it was that good, if it was just that pleasant to see him shining. So this is Psalm 76. This one also says for the leader, Lamnatseach, and this has a bed nigunot. This is a nigun, right? A nigunot. This is a instrumental is the way we translated it. And again, another psalm of Asaph, La Asaph, and the word shir at the end. So all of these are directions. Again, how's a mizmor different than a shir? We don't know. How's an instrumental different than the other ones? Were there not instruments played on those? They're very clear that there are instrumental ones that are not necessarily just a nigun. Yeah.
Psalms are often sung. As a matter of fact, well, high mass, they would always be sung.
Yeah, I mean, technically, we normally will sing psalms. I mean, it's not, we don't really usually read them, or we'll chant them, I guess. We'll chant them like Ashrei, we'll chant. So we don't really usually just read them, though they are. I mean, there are synagogues, especially Reform synagogues, started doing responsive readings of some of the psalms. But yeah, it doesn't really make sense that not all the psalms. I mean, with instrumental music, didn't they all have instrumental music? So we're not really sure what a nigun means, other than, excuse me, we use that term for instrumental music. And nowadays we use it for songs that don't even have words. A nigun doesn't even have words. So we don't know, but that's a lot. That's why it's translated in, I mean, in Hebrew, it's 5 words, but here it's a lot. It's a lot of words. We've been a lot of words that we don't even know what it means, though. And we translate it, and these are translated, but like I said, we could have just said, we're not really sure what any of these words mean or how they were supposed to be applied to the way it was sung. All right, so let's look at this is Psalm 76. Technically speaking, we're in the second half of the Psalms now.
God is known in Judah. God's name is great in Israel. Salem became an abode, Zion the divine den. There God broke the fiery arrows of the bow, the shield and the sword of war. Selah. You were resplendent, glorious on the mountains of prey. The stout-hearted were despoiled. They were in a stupor. The bravest of soldiers could not lift a hand. At your blast, O God of Jacob, horse and chariot lay stunned. Oh, you are awesome. Who can withstand you when you are enraged? In heaven, you pronounced sentence. The earth was numbed with fright as God rose to execute judgment, to deliver all the lowly of the earth. Selah. Even the fiercest among humans shall acknowledge you when you gird on the last bit of fury. Make vows and pay them to the eternal your God. Those all around shall bring tribute to the awesome one, who curbs the spirit of princes, inspires awe in the kings of the earth.
Interesting, right? Because here, another psalm where the feeling seems to be God is really powerful and is going to humble the nations, and I mean, here it's not just is going to bring an end to war. It's going to be so pronounced, the victory, that there won't be war anymore, because God's going to finish the battles. There's not going to be any more. It's interesting. Again, this psalm does not have a lot of presence in prayers. There's a tradition of saying this psalm on Sukkot, which is first day of Sukkot, which is a time of kind of thinking about victory and celebration, and shaking the lulav is almost like a battle, battle setting, but it's not this is really this is such a victory that there's not going to be any more battles again after that. There's definitely a feeling like this is Jerusalem. This is, the great things are going to happen here in our holy city. It uses the uses the word Salem, Salem, which is not the full name of Jerusalem, but or Jerusalem. It uses Salem, and then Zion, the divine den. It's it's a synonym. The word that they use, Sukkot, is for Sukkot. Probably why they use it on like why we used it on Sukkot, because it mentions that. But there's also this sense of kind of like a celebration, that this is when God's gonna fix everything. So it's a holiday, it's kind of a holiday psalm. But again, this is not a psalm that, like, there's not a lot of this that we pulled out for other stuff. It took it even, a line out of context. But again, similar to some of the other psalms that we've read, this is a victory psalm. This is a psalm of God scoring a major victory. Again, maybe to the point that that this is it, so it's not just, again, Jewish people, it's all the lowly of the earth. So it's a good image that, again, all the people who would terrorize people would be brought low. Well, let's take a look at Psalm 77, which is got another direction that we've read before, translated as Al Yedutun, or Al Yedutun. The not sure what Yedutun is. Instruments maybe that were played for it. Again, it's Lemnatzeach for the conductor, and it also says La Asaf. It doesn't say here a Mizmor La Asaf. It says La Asaf Mizmor, and it doesn't say the word shir, which the last ones did. The last ones here say shir at the end. This one doesn't. These don't say. Yeah. No, I mean, we don't. I mean, generally the songs that we do for Sukkot, or the music we do for Sukkot, is about Sukkot, not about. I think, look, traditionally that's what we did. We did the psalms that we did during the time of the temple, but some of the psalms don't seem to make sense to do anymore for the holiday, only from the standpoint is they don't really seem to speak to us in the same way that this holiday is a time of victory or yeah. I mean, I think it's because our ancestors who had a temple in Jerusalem, having that temple in Jerusalem as a place of celebration, and to some extent, if you have to defend it, every time you defended it and you defeated the people who were trying to attack it, or it was attacked, it was destroyed, and then we rebuilt it, it's a statement of our power. I don't think we really have that anymore. We don't have a place where we say, look, we're in this place and we've defended it, or God's protecting it, or I don't even think we don't feel that way even necessarily about Jerusalem anymore, because we didn't rebuild the temple. If we rebuilt the temple, you could make the argument that that kind of psalm would make sense, but it doesn't speak to people who aren't in a war for a certain, like, I guess you could make the argument that and I have made the argument that all of Israel is the temple. I've said that actually before. It's kind of my belief is, interestingly, the rest of Israel is now the holy temple. The only place that's not the holy temple is the holy temple. That's the irony. I think it's kind of cool, actually. The only place that's not our holy space is their holy space. But if you can flip that on its side and then say, flip it on its head and say, that's what I believe now. Of course, it makes it, I guess you could say, more problematic because every place then has to be defended. But they can have that place. They can have the place where your holy temple was. It's the rest of the place that we want. By the way, that allows them to have that place, but it also tells us that there's not one place that has to be better than any other place. But it's my take on it. But let's look at Psalm 77. It's probably the last psalm we'll read today. And you'll see some of, well, let's take a look at it.
I cry aloud to God. I cry to God that I may be heard. In my time of distress, I turn to my sovereign. With my hand uplifted, my eyes flow all night without respite. I will not be comforted. I call God to mind. I moan. I complain. My spirit fails. Selah. You have held my eyelids open. I am overwrought. I cannot speak. My thoughts turn to days of old, to years long past. I recall at night their jibes at me. I commune with myself. My spirit inquires, will my sovereign reject forever and never again show favor? Has such faithfulness disappeared forever? Will those promises be unfulfilled for all time? Has God forgotten how to pity? Has God's compassion been stifled in anger? Selah. And I said, it is my fault that the right hand of the Most High has changed. I recall the deeds of Yah. Yes, I recall your wonders of old. I recount all your works. I speak of your acts. O God, your ways are holiness. What God is as great as God? You are the God who works wonders. You have manifested your strength among the peoples. By your arm you redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. The waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you and were convulsed. The very deep quaked as well. Clouds streamed water. The heavens rumbled. Your arrows flew about. Your thunder rumbled like wheels. Lightning lit up the world. The earth quaked and trembled. Your way was through the sea, your path through the mighty waters. Your tracks could not be seen. You led your people like a flock in the care of Moses and Aaron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the psalm, as you saw, kind of has elements of both kinds of psalms that we've read today, which are psalms that are on a very personal level, and also psalms that are kind of national, have a theme of God going to battle. But this is it's probably a good place to finish today because there is this there is a the first half of the psalm, it seems like a person's, like Psalm 73 is kind of complaining about their life, how difficult their life is, and how how depressed and how sad they are. So it's a psalm that really has a feeling of personal of personal suffering, and as such, people have used it for that when they're feeling sad, when they're feeling run down, that they would turn to Psalm 77. But it also then goes into this God's victories and God's God's power. It really starts kind of in verse 13 where God does these wonders, and that gives the person hope. I mean, that gives the person hope that God will respond to my feelings of being left behind and not the depression that comes with, you know, the person says, I'm so upset I can't talk. So I can't sleep. So it's strange again how, you know, it shifts. The last half of the psalm is that you know, that redemption idea, and on a national level, on a macro level. And then again, as much as this psalm seems to start talking almost like a pagan psalm. I mean, it's almost like, right? It's
Yeah,
almost like,
there was all that weather stuff,
yeah,
earthquakes
and God destroying
lightning.
the waters. I mean, that's the most pagan part of it, right? You know, that God is the God who yeah, what God's like this God, right? Which implies that there are other gods. But
Yeah.
this, you know, the waters are trembling. This goes back to the beginning of, you know, we talked about before, of Genesis chapter 1, of God calming the waters, God putting the waters down. It's also kind of a little bit of the Leviathan myth too, which is that God destroys the sea monsters and the powers of the water. The waters are scared of God, right? Which is a very mythological picture. God riding around on with the lightning like Zeus up in the clouds. You know, all of that is there. But then it finishes with this coming through the Sea of Reeds, right? Coming through the Red Sea with Moses and Aaron. All of a sudden it just came back to a very biblical, you know, not necessarily the mythical God anymore of what everybody has, but this God that led us through the Red Sea and took care of us beyond Moshe and Aharon, right? It's not just Moses, it's Moses and Aaron. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that gets back to the person who is in distress, and the fact that this person wants God to take care of them. And at the end, this God that does all these miraculous big picture things is the God that takes care of them like the flock. And yeah, the hope is that you know, God who's doing big things will pay attention to me again and take care of me. So this psalm is, yeah, it's a perfect place to finish, because it gives us some of the things that we've seen not just today but throughout the Psalms, which is these glorification psalms of God with immense power, and at the same time, what does a person do when they're in deep distress? How does that God help me? And the Psalms actually tell us it's the same God. So what's interesting about it is that thousands of years ago, and again, whenever these were edited and put in their final place, again, maybe it's only 2,000 years ago, but 3,000 years ago, 2,800 years ago, people had an idea that the God who was the God who made the universe and who struck down the sea beasts and everything else was also the God that would take care of them when they were sad. That might be the biggest, you know, when we talk about theologies and all the other stuff that we get fancy about, that theology by itself might have been the most important revolutionary theology that Judaism had, even as much as moving from polytheism to monotheism. That was this idea that yeah, whatever God it was, that God is the same God who takes care of me when I'm sad. That's the difference. And again, to some extent, for a society that is moving away from polytheism and is distinguishing itself, what do you mean? There's a God that I can talk to that's the same God who's the God who is everything, but is also the God that takes care of me when I'm feeling depressed. It's the same God. That to say that was a revolution. That's the revolution. So next week we'll be here, God willing, again in person, and hopefully a more peaceful world too when we come back next week. And I'm just thinking, what psalm are we going to hear next week? Next week we're going to start, and it's weird to think that this next set of psalms that we're going to get to, very soon we're going to be in the Psalms. Probably not next week, but very soon we're going to be in the Psalms of Shabbat, which we actually sang a little bit this last Shabbat. Rick and Addie gave us a version of one of the Psalms that we get to during the Kabbalat Shabbat Psalms, the Mizmor Shir Psalms. So we're getting close to those Psalms. And so we're going to start seeing Psalms that we might be familiar to you. If they're not familiar to you, they should be, they will be. And hopefully you'll start to see some Psalms that we do sing a lot. So, so far, I have to, I'll point out to you when they are, but so far, most of the Psalms that we've had are not like regular parts of the liturgy. But when you get into the 90s, those are Psalms that we use for Shabbat. And soon you'll start to see some Psalms that you really are familiar with. All right, everybody. Thank you. And thank you, Rosemary, for helping us through the text. And everybody stay well. Enjoy the rest of the month of August. The next time we'll see you, we'll technically be in September. Crazy. All right, everybody. Take care. Thanks.
You too. Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.